be very informal. I'll ask a few questions, and then you two can be talking to each other, and I'll jump in as appropriate. The subject is Palestine, Israel, perhaps Lebanon, as we get further into the politics of the region. I've been there many times over the last 15 years, and I always, with one or two exceptions, always say, well, each time seems to be bleaker than the time I went before. And this seems to be continuing, even though in some ways it seemed like there was another opportunity. In some ways it seems like this opportunity may be slipping away. Depends on how you see what you call opportunity. But I thought we could start by just, I'd like to ask both Saree and Amy, and maybe starting with you, Amy, how do you see the situation on the ground right now, the politics of the region, vis-a-vis Israel, Palestine, and the prospects for peace and justice?
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit, just to give you a sense of my perspective. I was there at the very height of Oslo. I was living in Jerusalem. And we always thought, the foreign community that was sort of dumped in there as journalists, parachuting in, that there was no question that there would be peace in the region, because we were viewing it very much in a small prism at that moment. But as I've had more and more experience and gotten older with the situation, as we call it, I've realized that, in fact, it repeats itself and it gets worse, and that Oslo was sort of a magician's conjuring game, and it wasn't a reality that was serious. So I feel now that last year's terrible war in Gaza, you don't know what the Israelis what is their goal. And so say that there may have been an opening more recently for a bettering of the situation, but my feeling was that the goal of that conflict was not to better the situation, and it was maybe to pacify, thinking that it could possibly pacify, but that it was never going to work. And I think the situation is worse because the Israelis are now run by Netanyahu, and he's a man I've feared. I feared him when we were there, and he didn't quite come to power, and now he's really in power with Avigdor Lieberman as the foreign minister, a scary, scary thought, and a reality. So I feel that right now, in this very moment, unless we had a really strong American president to really push for a kind of peace that the Palestinians could get behind, that it's just not a happening thing. And I wonder how far we differ on this, Saree.
Well, I'm not sure that it's as. I mean, obviously, in one way, the situation is appalling on the ground. The people in Gaza alone are suffering, unspeakable horror right now, and they have been for a while. What always strikes me about Gaza in particular, it seems to drop out of the news headlines about Gaza, is that the overwhelming majority of the population of Gaza is made of children. So it's important to keep focusing on that fact, especially when you see children, to think that basically a strip of 1.5 million people, of whom something like 800,000 or 900,000 are children. It's a staggering thought to think that they're essentially without food and water and supplies and housing, so forth.
And medical care.
And trying to concentrate on school and not being able to. I mean, it's an appalling.
And having half-day school because there are too many of them.
It's unspeakable. So there's no question that at a human level, the situation is definitely catastrophic. But it also seems to me that there's a certain kind of clarity that we've gotten to now. And I think the situation for most of the world, if not actually the Israelis, is actually much, much clearer now than it has ever been before. And strangely enough, I think that the war on Gaza actually helped crystallize that for people around the world. So I think basically.
How do you mean?
I mean, I think the war on Gaza was so outrageous and so indefensible and so inexcusable. And Goldstone's report made it clear, but
it was unmasking.
It was just there were already several other unmasking. The war in Lebanon in 2006, the invasion in 1982, the re-invasion of the West Bank in 2000. There's a whole series of these things. Sabra, Tolan. So I mean, there's a long list of them. But at some point, you get to the straw that breaks the camel's back. And I think Gaza, the war in Gaza last year, was that straw. So that now the entire world, I think, can see with incredible clarity what the situation is. And it's true that the Israelis don't see it, but on the other hand, it's not clear to me that they actually have to see it in order for the world to do what it takes to make peace real, rather than just something that's talked about. So on the one hand, if you look at the situation now, it's incredibly bleak in human terms. On the other hand, I think politically speaking, there's an opportunity that exists now precisely because it's so bleak, ironically.
Right. There is a question how long the Israelis can go on defying international opinion.
And I think we've reached a point where...
And with the Goldstone report, I think that's the really interesting thing about the Goldstone report is the Israeli reaction, and I speak here, I'm a Jew, I speak about the government of Israel, I would not categorize the entire population, but the government is saying, we will not respond with any kind of military investigation, we will address legal issues and public relations issues. And I think if the Israelis can only confront this damning report with public relations, they're already admitting that they've made a terrible mistake. So maybe you're right.
I mean, I don't want to crow about a victory.
I don't think that's the moment.
But not at all. But it's true. I think that there is that kind of clarity is where we are now. I think. So.
And at the same time, I mean, you look talking about the international community, and then you have this other player known as the American administration. And there was a lot of, when I was referring to a sense of optimism among some people a moment ago, I was mostly talking about people, some people feeling optimistic that George Mitchell coming in under the Obama administration, there'd be real changes, and that the kind of pressure that was, or the recognition of what happened in Gaza toward Israel from the international community probably doesn't, at least at the moment, extend to the Obama administration. So I wanted to ask you both to talk a little bit about how you see the U.S.'s role right now, and is it different? Actually, I remember you talking just as Obama was coming in at a conference in Irvine, and you were a little skeptical then, and so you maybe your position hasn't changed, sorry, but I wanted to ask you both, how do you see the current administration and what role it's playing, and how could or should it be different?
For me, again, I haven't watched it as closely as Saree probably has, but it feels very much as though the American administration is not pushing hard enough. That the one thing I know that they've done is put pressure on Abbas to not to stand behind the Goldstone report. So, and I think that essentially, what kind of American administration does that? Then they're undermining the person they ostensibly want to be the leader of the Palestinians. If they put him in a position where he can no longer lead his people because they're forcing him to make stands that are unacceptable to the people in Palestine, then I don't understand what can be their ostensible goal.